think back to the time I was sort of 10, and I spent a lot of time in the shed with my dad. He was a civil servant, but he always had a very sort of practical bent, and he was forever making stuff out of junk, machines and basically anything. So a lot of that rubbed off on me, and he was also quite a forward thinker in as much as he was quite a sort of environmentalist. We're talking about sort of early mid-70s. He set up a nature reserve on an old rubbish tip and that sort of thing. So he died when I was 15, but up until that point I remember just spending a lot of time with him, making things, and we used to do pottery together and that sort of thing. I was very much into art. I was also into engineering, so I ended up doing industrial design, mainly as a way of getting a job, really. I've sort of gone through various career changes, if you can call it a career. I've wanted to be an actor and a musician and all of that stuff, but I've always been a designer. He had a really powerful influence on me as an adult. I worked for a design consultancy for about 5 or 6 years, which was really interesting work. Yeah. Took me to lots of interesting places, and then I moved. I sort of joined a guy who just set up a company, and I was design director, and I just found that didn't suit me, and I was with him for a year, and then I resigned and basically became self-employed. And then, like I said, I did some acting and I wanted to be a musician, but it always came back to the sort of me as being a designer. And then back in around 2013, I was in the process of buying a guitar, and I just realised that there was absolutely nothing out there that I wanted to buy, and what I wanted to see when I went into a shop was my guitar that I hadn't sort of designed yet. So that's basically what made me think, right, I'm going to redesign the acoustic guitar. I don't mean that in a sort of big-headed way, but that's essentially what I've done. Yeah, and then all the stuff I sort of learned as a child and from my dad has all sort of piled into this process of prototyping and redesigning all the time. But it took sort of 2 or 3 years to actually reach a point where I was thinking, yes, I have a product, to sell, and a sort of like a philosophy, an ethos or whatever, the package sort of thing. And it also reminded me of about 20 years before, I'd actually written a song called Mahogany. And the song basically said, well, it's fine singing about the plight of the rainforests, but the instrument you're playing is made of mahogany or whatever that's come from a rainforest. So, that's all so linked into what I do now, although when I wrote it I didn't realise, 20 years later I'm going to be making guitars or whatever. So when I started selling the guitars, obviously the price was a bit of an issue. I was thinking, what do I sell them for? And because I always had thought, well, I can make one in a week, I thought, well, what do I want to earn for that week? So I came up with 500 quid, and that's what I sold them for, £500. And people were happy with that. Some people said, God, that's way too cheap, they should be £2,000, but they're hand-built, they're innovative, they're made in this country, so they haven't travelled all over the world. They're made from materials that, the top I'm making at the moment actually came out of one of those cherry trees. So it's travelled, it went to the sawmill, a quarter of a mile away, and it came back here, so, it hasn't travelled that great a distance. So yeah, because a lot of the materials are reclaimed, are basically free. I now use a lot of reclaimed laminate, which would all end up in the skip. I've sort of more or less stuck to that price bracket. Now they're $5.99, and some of them are slightly cheaper. But that's sort of okay for the moment. Yes, it's 600 quid, but it's still accessible to a lot of people. What I didn't want to do was make, 3 or 4 grand hand-built guitars and then I have a fairly limited customer base. They buy it to put on their wall or something, or hey, look, I've got a hand-built guitar. That's, I didn't want to didn't want to go down that route. Because of my background as a product designer, I really wanted just to make a product. You know, they're not sort of one-off. I mean, everyone is individual, but they're not sort of one-off pieces of art. I did my degree back in the 80s, and I suppose in the 80s, you know, there were certain sort of designers who had, you know, quite a big sort of influence, I suppose. I'm struggling to actually think of somebody who sort of influenced me, because the only person I can really think who influenced me was my dad, as opposed to, you know, a designer. I mean, I get influenced by artists or painters or musicians or music, but I can't say I've actually been influenced by a designer, as it were. The design consultancy I worked for, they did a lot of work for police force, because it was design and ergonomics. So they sort of essentially designed police control rooms. They did a lot of work for the prison service. So it wasn't quite, you know, designing hairdryers and, you know, products per se, as it were. You know, when I sell a guitar, invariably I will get a really nice email saying, I bought this guitar, it's great, you know, all of that stuff. And, you know, just some really lovely comments. I recently made one that went to Barbados, the guy's moved there, so I had a lovely email from him. I've also made guitars where somebody has come to me with a piece of wood. So I made a guitar for a young chap who had some wood from it was a Norfolk sailing barge. His friend was restoring, and he said, well, could you make me a guitar from this wood? It was pretty knackered, the wood, but, you know, I managed it, and this amazing top on this guitar. He plays it in a band and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I you know, sometimes it's just sort of, you know, gets me right there, you know. And sometimes it's quite sort of, oh, blimey, you know. It's almost like the pressure builds a bit. Or I hope it stays how they want it. If you paint a painting, all it needs to do is hang on the wall and the paint not fall off the canvas. With the guitar, it's almost like, well, this has got to have like a 40-year or longer lifespan, and it's got to be played, and so it's quite a tall order to sort of make something that has an expected sort of lifespan. You know, it's not a sort of throwaway thing. And also, a couple of times, you know, my guitars have been, you know, sold on to somebody else, which is quite nice in a way, because they're sort of circulating out there.